mistake by Rehoboam caused the breakup of the nation of Israel, and why? This is the question we seek to answer today as we continue our verse-by-verse study of the book of 1 Kings on walking through the Bible. Today we're going to be discussing 1 Kings chapter 12, verses 1 to 15. But before we do that, let's read the passage. If you have a Bible with you, you can turn to 1 Kings chapter 12, verse 1. But if you don't have a Bible, don't worry. Just follow along with us on the screen. The version that we'll be reading from is the New King James Version. So 1 Kings chapter 12, beginning at verse 1. And Rehoboam went to Shechem, for all Israel had gone to Shechem to make him king. So it happened, when Jeroboam the son of Nebat heard it, he was still in Egypt, for he had fled from the presence of King Solomon, had been dwelling in Egypt, that they sent and called him. Then Jeroboam and the whole assembly of Israel came and spoke to Rehoboam, saying, Your father made our yoke heavy. Now therefore, lighten the burdensome service of your father, and his heavy yoke which he put on us, and we will serve you. So he said to them, Depart for 3 days, then come back to me. And the people departed. Then King Rehoboam consulted the elders who stood before his father Solomon while he still lived, and he said, How do you advise me to answer these people? And they spoke to him, saying, If you will be a servant to these people today, and serve them, and answer them, and speak good words to them, then they will be your servants forever. But he rejected the advice which the elders had given him, and consulted the young men who had grown up with him, who stood before him. And he said to them, What advice do you give? How should we answer this people who have spoken to me, saying, Lighten the yoke which your father put on us? Then the young men who had grown up with him spoke to him, saying, Thus you shall speak to this people, who have spoken to you, saying, Your father made our yoke heavy, but you make it lighter on us. Thus you shall say to them, My little finger shall be thicker than my father's waist. And now, whereas my father put a heavy yoke on you, I will add to your yoke. My father chastised you with whips, but I will chastise you with scourges. So Jeroboam and all the people came to Rehoboam the 3rd day, as the king had directed, saying, Come back to me the 3rd day. Then the king answered the people roughly, and rejected the advice which the elders had given him. And he spoke to them according to the advice of the young men, saying, My father made your yoke heavy, but I will add to your yoke. My father chastised you with whips, but I will chastise you with scourges. So the king did not listen to the people. For the turn of events was from the Lord, that he might fulfill his word, which the Lord had spoken by Ahijah the Shilonite to Jeroboam, the son of Nebat. 1 Kings 12 will be an inflection point in Israel's history since the days they left Egypt under the leadership of Moses. By 1 Kings 12, about 516 years have passed since Israel left Egypt, and about 470 years had passed since they settled in Canaan. And for those first 350 years, they had been somewhat united, in the sense that they were not enemies with one another, but were led more at the tribal level along with the judges that God would raise up. Then came King Saul, with the nation gradually uniting around him. This unity was greater than the days of the judges, but it was still not entirely united. Then came the days of David, which saw greater unity, and then the days of Solomon, which saw Israel united to the point that they could expand their territory and hold it. But such unity was short-lived, because of sin, and in truth, the days of Solomon only papered over the political divisiveness that laid beneath the surface, divisiveness that would rear its ugly head following Solomon's death. With Solomon now dead, we can use our anchor date of 605 BC and the taking away of the first wave of captives by Nebuchadnezzar to determine that we're in about 930 BC. You'll see how we arrive at that date as we study on through the rest of 1 Kings and into 2 Kings, but based on our chronology, this is about where we are in time. That is why we said that David's reign began in 1010 BC, that Solomon's reign began in 970 BC after a 40-year reign of David, and the temple construction began in 966 BC and ended in 959 BC. Solomon reigned for 40 years, bringing our timeline down to 930 BC. From here on out, we will be using our own chart to show our march through history, as both 1st and 2nd Kings will alternate between the kings of Judah and the kings of Israel, making it harder to know where we are in history without a chart, so we hope you'll find it useful. Rehoboam, Solomon's son, reigned in Solomon's place once Solomon died. Upon ascension to the throne, Rehoboam chose Shechem as the city in which to be coronated king. Now, why would Rehoboam choose here? For it's not where his father was coronated, which was in Jerusalem. It was not where his grandfather, David, was coronated, which was in Hebron. And it was not even where King Saul was coronated, which was in Gilgal. Why Shechem? Well, I don't believe Rehoboam was oblivious to the political situation he inherited when he became king, with northern tribal unrest, especially among the tribe of Ephraim. So choosing a city within the boundaries of Ephraim and a city of importance dating all the way back to Joshua was prudent if he wished to keep the kingdom united. The map on the screen gives you the location of Shechem in relation to Jerusalem, but do keep in mind that the borders of Ephraim on this map are slightly off, as we have discussed in the past, as the city of Shechem laid within the boundaries of Ephraim and not Manasseh. But the choice of a coronation in the north is about the only positive gesture towards the north that Rehoboam was seemingly willing to make, for when Israel came to meet him, along with Jeroboam, who had been summoned from Egypt upon the death of Solomon, the north presented Rehoboam with an ultimatum. Lift the heavy burdens that Solomon had laid on us, and we will serve you forever, or don't, and we will not follow after your kingship. That was the very first thing spoken by the north to Rehoboam, and should have caused him to know immediately that the situation may be even more worse than he expected. And it should have caused him to know that the proper course of action was to ease tensions, not further them along. But that's not what Rehoboam ultimately decided. For sure, Solomon's advisors, referred to here as the elders, advised Rehoboam to lighten the load and acquiesce to the demands of the north for the sake of unity. And when you think about it, the demands of the north were not unreasonable. Solomon's kingdom was quite wealthy, and that wealth wasn't with Solomon alone, for the people prospered too. But Solomon's building projects cost money that was taxed from the people. Feeding the large court of the king meant that further tax on the vegetation produced each year was placed on the people. And then, of course, there was the upkeep of the palace and the paying of all of Solomon's staff, all of which cost a vast amount of money. These are all things that the Lord had warned Israel against when they asked for a king back in 1 Samuel 8, but it's something they said they were able to bear. Except these people were now 120 years later, not wanting to bear that burden. But if Rehoboam would have been smart, he would have lowered the tax burden a bit on the people. Perhaps the staff could be cut as the new administration came to power. Perhaps building projects could be slowed down or perhaps halted altogether in places they were not needed. There were numerous ways for the king to save enough money that he could have lowered taxes for the sake of unity. But no, he didn't do that. Instead, he listened to the advice of the younger men who had grown up with him, which told him to tell the north that if they hated the burdens that Solomon placed on them, then they would really hate the burdens that he would place on them, for they would be even greater. They told him to tell the north that Solomon chastised them with whips, while he would chastise them with scourges, a multi-thong whip meant to inflict even more pain. In short, Rehoboam was told to tell the people, "You ain't seen nothing yet." And stupidly, that's the advice that Rehoboam took. Now, why would Rehoboam heed what was obviously terrible advice? Well, there are three reasons, really. Two from a human perspective and one from God's perspective. From the human perspective, a new leader often comes in a little headstrong, wanting to put his own stamp on the job, and yet here he is essentially being dictated to that he can't do everything that he might want to do, for a lack of money should he cut taxes. Heeding this advice might thus be seen as weakness, something undesirable if one wanted to remain king for a long time. The second reason has to do with the age of Rehoboam. We're later going to find out that he is 41 years old here, not young, but not old either. And as is often the case with younger rulers, they don't like taking advice from older people, thinking that they, as younger people, know better. Young rulers do this to their detriment, as Rehoboam does here. In truth, though, the text says that Rehoboam heeded this advice because the events were brought about from the Lord in order to fulfill his word concerning Jeroboam, spoken by Ahijah the Shilonite. No, God didn't force Rehoboam to take advice against Rehoboam's will, but God brought about the events as he did, knowing the arrogance of Rehoboam. God doesn't need to make us robots in order for his will to be accomplished. He knows our hearts too well and can bring about events that will fulfill his word, because after all, he is an all-knowing, all-powerful God. He put on the heart of the leaders of the north to ask for an easing of the burdens, knowing full well that the arrogance of Rehoboam wouldn't heed this request. He made sure that there were those surrounding Rehoboam that would advise him to reject the north's proposal, again of their own free will. So why did Rehoboam reject good advice and heed bad advice? So that the will of the Lord be done. Solomon had sinned, and the Lord's word concerning that punishment was now coming to pass. Rehoboam, a sinful man in his own right, was the man through whom that word was fulfilled. We'll see the response of the northern tribes, the Lord willing, in the next lesson. With that, our time is up for today. The Lord willing, we hope you'll join us for tomorrow's discussion of 1 Kings chapter 12, verses 16 to 24, as we continue our walk through the Bible, one verse at a time. Thank you for watching today's episode. We hope that you found it edifying and ask that you not only subscribe to our channel and podcast, but that you like and share this episode among your friends, so that the saving gospel of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.